in with the waiting room. Hi, everyone. Welcome. Welcome to our second reading event of the spring semester. This is our own welcoming event for our spring term visiting writer, Aya de León. I'm, of course, Dave Madden. I'm the academic director of the MFA program. I'm just going to say a few quick thanks before passing it on to Lale. This reading is possible with the support of the College of Arts and Sciences, the Dean's Office at the College of Arts and Sciences. So let's thank them for all the work they do for us. And of course, every event we put together wouldn't be possible without the hard work of our program assistant, Kimberly Garrett, and our administrative director, Micah Ballard. So let's visually hear it for Kimberly and Micah for all their help. Thank you, you too. As you know, you're all on mute. We will have time later for a Q&A with Aya. And if you have a question, you can use the raise hand feature and we can, we'll invite you to unmute so you can ask your question, or you can ask it in the chat if that's easier. Lale will have more to say about this when she's up. And a quick reminder that you may want to switch to speaker view if you want to see who is, currently speaking, i.e. our reader, so they're on stage. Okay, that's all I've got. Thanks for being here. It's great to see all of you, and I'll pass it off to Lale.
Hello, welcome. Hi, happy Tuesday. Hi, Aya. So it falls upon me. I have the honor of introducing Aya tonight and sort of navigating the Q&A. I think because we are limited by time, I would ask you to send me your questions for Aya as they come to you in the chat. And then towards 7:10, 7:15-ish, whenever Aya's done reading and talking, I will go into the chat and just start calling on people and do my best to unmute you so that you can ask the question in person and Aya can see your face and we can have as organic and biologic experience as possible, given the circumstances. We don't go full robot because I don't believe that any of you exist right now. So let's prove that wrong. Okay. So thank you, yes, to Kimberly and Micah and Dave and everybody in the MFA program for getting this event together. Even though we are virtual, these things take energy and coordination. And Dave's concern for our safety, I think, has been super great. And I feel like, even if we don't have a smooth thing, which I think we will, every measure was taken. So let us launch forth into the evening. Okay, a few years ago, in the before times, Aya and I were guests at a ladies only tea party announcing the launch of a women-centered literary organization. All of these gender dynamics aside, the event was fascinating. A couple had generously donated their Sausalito mansion for the afternoon, and I wandered the dark wood hallways, peeking into rooms decorated with gigantic teddy bears, 4 or 5 times my size, ferns, and turn-of-the-century furniture. Finally, I found the rest of the party in the kitchen where I saw Aya sipping tea. We talked about many things that afternoon, mostly our children and public schools. And when it came time for the speeches, we stood politely with our saucers and teacups and listened to the head of the new organization make her pitch, passionately extolling the need and benefit of a place where women could gather to listen to female writers, where femininity was put at a premium, unapologetically. I remember thinking and listening to all this and wondering, wow, is this lady real? She's got plans to push literature forward and she knows how to talk to rich people and create a space where artists can, and where they can contribute to artists and their books. And right around then, Aya whispered to me, good for her, she's a hustler. And that's what I remember most vividly from that afternoon. Aya's comment, her attitude, and her openness. It's not every day you meet a person who can see all the worlds at once, and rather than judge or sit on a moral horse or turn away, understands that there is a hustle to everything, and that's not a bad thing. It is at this nexus of women and power that much of Aya's work resides. Here I use the word woman to signify many things: matriarchy, family, fertility, sexuality, the poetics of the body, history, inheritance, girlhood, innocence, intelligence, and pleasure. And I use power to signify agency in environments that cannot be controlled, clarity of vision in places where blindness is instituted, money, community, spiritual and emotional wealth, family, and commitment to struggle. These are the places you go when you read Aya, her work, everything from the years of poetry performance of Deaf Poetry Jam brilliance into the theater of Thieves in the Temple that opened the door for women who love hip hop to say, wait a minute, with the misogyny, to the award-winning heist romance series, Justice Hustler series, Uptown Thief, Side Chick Nason, The Boss, The Accidental Mistress, and now to A Spy in the Struggle, listed as fall 2020's most anticipated reads by Crime Reads and The Washington Post. She was named Best Discovery in Theater by SF Chronicle for Thieves in the Temple, and also received a Goldie Award from the SF Bay Guardian in spoken word for Thieves. And her subsequent show, Aya de León is Running for President. Later, we can discuss what happened to that. We still have time. In 2005, she was voted the Slaminist Poet in the East Bay Express. A graduate of Harvard College with an MFA in fiction from Antioch University, Aya has been an artist in resident at Stanford, a Cave Canem Poetry Fellow, and a Slam Poetry Champion, and is currently the director of the June Jordan Poetry for the People Center at UC Berkeley. She publicly married herself in the 90s, and from 1995 to 2012, she hosted an annual Valentine's Day show that focused on self-love. She is currently at work on a YA Spy Girl series featuring African-American and Latina teens called Going Dark, as well as a picture book to help talk to children about racism. Her work, which centers on women's and their bodies amidst climate change, structural racism, and sexism, creates believable heroines. It's not easy to pull off this magic of entertaining while empowering, challenging while celebrating. It is this work that reaches across category and resists labels, pushing literature farther and farther from the old establishment, and thus making it meaningful and necessary to today, to many of us. Like I said, women in power. Like I said, hustle in a good way. It's with great admiration and respect that I welcome Aya de León to the University of San Francisco.
Thank you so much, Lale. I feel so seen with my hustle comment. What's hilarious.
I love hustlers. They're my favorite. I saw you that day.
It was like, yes. And it was an odd day, but you know, I mean, I definitely come from a lineage of women who, you know, have made that way out of no way. And hustle of many different types of hustle have been required for that project. Oh my goodness. Thank you. Well, I want to just say, I really appreciate, because the memory that I had was back when AWP was in person, we were in the like massive mall of vendors and different presses and books, and we ran into each other and you were like, hey, you know, one of these days we should get you to USF. And I was like, you're like, let me tell you what, you know, what it's like. And here's the deal. And I remember being like, yeah, that sounds great. You know, and then bam, here I am in the middle of the pandemic under all these wild circumstances. But I have to say, it's just been lovely and right on time. And, you know, I'm someone who has a very loose and laid back sense of the divine and celestial. And, you know, this spring term is probably the only spring term in the last 15 years or for the next decade that I would be available to do this, because my program, for various reasons, was on hiatus, having to do with issues over at Berkeley. And so it just felt kind of miraculous to get the offer when I did. And it's just been delightful being here. And I want to shout out to my students. We've been having so much fun so far. I've really enjoyed what I've read from my students in workshop, and shout out to Dave, Micah, and everyone who has facilitated my onboarding in the chaos of what is the life of the working writing mom that many of you know about. So I want to read from, this new book, A Spy in the Struggle, which is my first spy novel and my first standalone novel. And the thing that I want to say to the folks just starting out, that I started this book in my 20s and have been working on it for decades. And it kept changing over the years. And originally, it's about COINTELPRO and domestic spying, essentially modern day COINTELPRO, and the FBI spying on progressive organizations. It started with a racial justice organization, and then as time went on, it became important to me that it be a eco-racial justice organization working on climate and Black lives. And so that was part of what changed over the years. I'm going to read the little description off the back cover, just so you get oriented to what's happening in the book. And then I'll read a few excerpts and then I'll take questions. I love questions. Since childhood, Yolanda Vance has forged her desire to escape poverty into a laser-like focus that took her through prep school and Harvard Law. So when her prestigious New York law firm is raided by the FBI, Yolanda turns in her corrupt bosses to save her career and goes to work for the Bureau. Soon she's sent undercover at Red, Black, and Green, an African-American extremist organization back in her California town. She's anticipating a career win, not for an unexpected romance to open her heart and a suspicious death to open her eyes. Menacing dark money forces will do anything to bury Yolanda and the movement. As the stakes escalate and one misstep could cost her life, Yolanda will need to decide between betraying the cause of her people or invoking the wrath of the world's most powerful law enforcement agency. So the first excerpt that I want to read is about, so part of what I'm looking at here in the book, in addition to obviously the FBI, right, is what happens when a person who is really isolated, has picked a path of isolation, and is forced to pretend to be connected, right? So that's part of the character arc here, is that in being forced to pretend to be connected, all of the and being connected brings us to back into ourselves in a particular way. So she's been on this success path and is being forced to make connections that are bringing her into herself. So I want to read this group, Red, Black, and Green. It has a lot of teenagers in it. It's one of these youth-led political organizations, and they're very holistic, very Northern California. And so this is the scene at one of the meetings when they do a meditation. And so part of what we see throughout the book is flashbacks of her early life. So the wellness coordinator of the group is doing a meditation, and her name is Sharon. She's Latina. Welcome, everyone, Sharon began. We're going to start with meditation. Yolanda had a sudden recollection, the smell of incense drifting into the hallway. Walking into the house, elbow and knee scraped from falling off her bike. She was maybe 10, 11. Close your eyes. Put your feet flat on the floor, Sharon said, her voice low and lulling. The bike had been Yolanda's best friend in the entire state of Colorado. Yolanda would ride out to the desert, pretending she was on an uninhabited island or another planet. Feel the breath in your chest, your nose, the back of your throat. That day she had ridden far from home and down a street past two white boys. When she looped back by, one of them poked a stick into the spokes of her back wheel. As she'd fallen into the dust, the stick had broken. She had stood back up on the bike as they approached. Exhaling all the stress and tension, all the frustration and conflicts of the day. Yolanda had fought, hit one of them with the stick, and ran into the other with the bike. She rode home, the bent spoke making a whirring sound as the back wheel of the bike wobbled beneath her. And breathing in abundance, ease, peace, compassion. She had run into the house, bleeding, tears running down her dusty cheeks. The incense smell greeted her. Through the door to the bedroom, she could see her mother's broad back, red and orange blouse, soft material flowing over her mother's iced coffee-colored shoulders, her mother chanting Nam-myoho Renge Kyo over and over, so fast that Yolanda couldn't make out any of the words. She learned at some point that it was supposed to mean devotion to the mystic law of the Lotus Sutra, but in her mother's mouth it translated to, don't bother me while I'm meditating. Keeping the focus on the breath. When you notice yourself drifting, no judgment, just bring your awareness back. Yolanda had washed her scraped limbs with alcohol and bit down on the sting. Meditation is about being present in the moment, about awareness, noticing your breath. Her mother didn't even notice the X of bandages on her elbow, the pale shade of flesh tone that didn't match anything on Yolanda's body except the palms of her hands and the soles of her feet. Yolanda did her own laundry, washing the blood out of the knee of her jeans. So that is, just one of the flashbacks. Part of what we have with Yolanda is she moves around a lot, and that's part of the disconnection. So that was Colorado, and she ends up being in pretty much every part of the country at some point in the book, both through present time and flashbacks. I want to read the funeral scene. So when she was 5, her father died, and this is part of the funeral scene. And I'll say, just from a craft perspective, I wrote poetry for many years, mostly spoken word, pretty narrative, but there would be these more poetic moments, and I was able to bring more of them to this book than I had to many of my than I'd been able to do with my heist series. So this is her. There's a scene that takes place in a cemetery, and this is the flashback to her dad's funeral. Black girl, black dress, black hair in braids, black patent leather shoes, tiny matching black patent leather purse. She had lost the purse. Nobody cared. She didn't care. There had been nothing in the purse. What does a 5-year-old need with a purse? A little lady, a brave little lady, the church women said. Black church women. Black church, black funeral, black mama. Black dress, black hat, black daddy, black suit. Yolanda's white socks and her daddy's white shirt were the only things not black that she recalled anyone wearing at the funeral, the burial, and as they closed the casket, lowered the lid over the black suit, black daddy, she could feel the connection sever, like the socks and the shirt were the last of their connection, and she cried into the white handkerchief they gave her. And she remembered thinking that she would have liked his shirt instead, his white shirt, which she thought would smell like him. Of course, it wouldn't have. It would have smelled like starch and like face powder and embalming fluid, but you can't understand when you're 5 that your father has never really worn the shirt, that he has never sweated, mixing that cologne and daddy smell, the heat of his body breaking down the starch that your mother so carefully presses into the shirt to make it crisp and white, just so he can turn it into a sodden, smelly rag when he preaches in the pulpit on Sundays. You can't understand that your mother is crying because she will not miss starching those shirts, that she hated starching those shirts, that she would run the iron over the white fabric thinking that she had not gotten her teaching credential at Howard so she could iron his shirts before she left for work every morning while he had much more leisure time. Let him iron his own damn shirts. But then she had left them to him. But when she had left them to him, they came out uneven, lumps in some spots, crackling with too much starch in others. The churchwomen sucked their teeth at her bad housekeeping. A bold young woman even offered to help the minister, as she could see that his wife was so busy with teaching and all, and that it was no trouble. Yolanda's mother could see that she had better be the one to starch and iron those shirts, that if she didn't, someone else would, that a minister in the South never needs to learn to iron. But now at the funeral, her mother would starch every shirt in Georgia just to have him back. And she had her own white handkerchief that she was crying into, just like Yolanda. They were nearly exact replicas in their grief, except for the scale. Her mother was bigger, and except for the white socks. One of the things that, I'm looking at in here is just sort of legacy and the movement for Black lives. One of the things that the father is involved in when Yolanda is, too little to really understand is police violence against the Black community. And she loses him. Her mom is, as you can see, pretty shut down and not able to think well about her. So she becomes one of these Black folks who buys into the notion of the American dream that if you work hard, you can get whatever you need, and that any Black people who are having a problem, it's their fault that they didn't work hard enough or made bad choices. And so one of the things that, and that's one of the reasons she ends up working for the FBI. It's not her first choice, but she has no ideological opposition to the FBI of her own. Um, and the next piece that I want to read, it has to do later in the book when she's starting to feel conflicted and sort of suspicious about what the FBI is telling her. And they mention the death of Fred Hampton, who was in the Black Panther Party. There's a new film that just came out, Judas and the Black Messiah, which is the first feature film about it. And it's really, really powerful and well done. And this is the moment where Yolanda sort of learns about this chapter in the FBI's history. So one of the things you need to know is at this point, she's feeling really paranoid. She has no idea if she's being watched or not, and she's trying to get this information. So she goes to an independent bookstore in San Francisco and is trying to read about the Black Panthers, but she can't be doing it openly. So she gets a fashion magazine and she's sort of flipping the pages simultaneously of the book and the fashion magazine, and she's hunched in a chair. So if anyone sees her, she appears to be reading this magazine. So I think that's what you need to know. Yolanda slid down in the chair and put her knees up, sliding the book below the magazine and nestling the spines of each in the crack between her thighs. The magazine peeked out above her knees, but the COINTELPRO book was hidden below it. COINTELPRO stands for Counterintelligence Program, and that was the counterintelligence program that the FBI ran in the late 1960s, where they really used all kinds of dirty tricks, including murder, to destroy the Black Panther Party and other radical movements of people of color. Yolanda spent the next hour perfecting her technique of flipping the pages simultaneously. To any observer, Yolanda looked like a woman deeply absorbed in fashion. And so it was that in her mind, the murder of Fred Hampton would always be juxtaposed with what to wear when throwing the perfect spring evening party. The combination was so bizarre that she would recall the experience as a sort of surreal dream. The image of Fred Hampton, open mouth to microphone, with his circa 1969 kinky hair matching the nap of the faux sheepskin lining of his dark leather coat, would always be juxtaposed with the sleek and shiny fabrics of evening wear. His earnest, furious expression contrasting with the vapid, sullen faces of the models. The image of 14 heavily armed Chicago police officers storming into the apartment of the young Black Panther leader would always have the unexpected presence of white fashion models with inhumanly long eyelashes that extended beyond the thick black smudges of liner at the edges of their glassy eyes, strutting through the runway of the frame with long bony legs and pointy stiletto heels, carrying trays of canapes that none of them would be allowed to eat. How to stand out when so many of your guests will be dressed alike. The mental newsreel of the police in identical riot gear busting into Hampton's bedroom and killing Hampton while he slept next to his wife, who was expecting, would always coexist with the challenging questions of style. Are you ready for the unexpected? What does the well-dressed widow wear to her husband's murder? If she's 8 months pregnant, which designers will offer their couture in maternity wear? So many unexpected guests, all so early for the party. 4:45 a.m. and the hostess is unprepared for company, but funeral black is perfect for all such occasions. Black dress, Black Panther, Black power. Mark Clark, the young Panther guarding Fred Hampton, fired only one bullet. One witness said it was accidental, as he fell from his chair shot in the heart by police. The well-dressed hostess will hope it was 99. That plus the Panther shot makes a nice even 100. Parties thrive on even numbers. What to do when some of your most influential guests exhibit such bad manners? That's Fred Hampton. Is he dead? Bring him out. He's barely alive. He'll make it. 2 shots were heard, which it was later discovered were fired point blank in Hampton's head. According to Deborah Johnson, one officer then said, "He's good and dead now." Parties are wonderful, but such a trial to clean up. Hampton's body was dragged into the doorway of the bedroom and left in a pool of blood. The raiders then directed their gunfire toward the remaining Panthers, who were hiding in another bedroom. They were wounded, then beaten and dragged into the street, where they were arrested on charges of aggravated assault and the attempted murder of the officers. They were held on $100,000 bail apiece. What will people say about your party afterward? So, one of the things that we'll be looking at in my seminar class has to do with social commentary in fiction. And we're reading a book that's very preachy. And I think it's interesting, in some moments that, I often tell my students, show, don't tell, show, don't tell. So this book is a lot of tell. And in some moments the tell works and other times it gets too preachy. But I definitely like figuring out how to have preachy moments in books where I just share the things that I think are really important to have said explicitly in a given book. So this next passage is my preachy moment in this book. And, one of the things that I like to do is have a book that has a lot of different things going on, but then there's sort of like a rally scene or a scene where someone would be making a speech, and then you cut it down, but that's an opportunity to have characters say something that they would say that works in the moment. So when I originally wrote this, like I said, it was about racial justice, and then I wanted to add climate justice. So this is a moment, there's a suspicious death of a Black woman that takes place that the police are not properly responding to and investigating. And so people are speaking out about it in this scene. A young woman spoke next. She had brightly colored braids and several piercings. We got to care about every single person in our community, whether they use drugs, whether they sell drugs, whether they've been in prison, whether they still in prison, whether they sell in sex, everybody. All Black lives matter. The room pounded with applause again. The next speaker was an androgynous young person with a large red afro. I don't know what happened to Anitra Jenkins, they said, but I know Randell Corporation is behind it. These corporations are desperate. Time is running out for the greenwashing corporations like Randell that are trying to convince people that we can save the planet while they still make mega profits. They're trying to squeeze every dollar out of a dying economy. It's just not sustainable. And they don't care who gets in their way. People disappear. People die in mysterious accidents. They made quote marks in the air. These corporations are willing to bring the entire human race to extinction to keep making money. How can we expect them to care about any one individual human life, let alone the lives of Black females and femmes? They don't. Time is running out, which is why we need to keep organizing to deal with this climate crisis in ways that prioritize our people and our solutions. So that was me preaching. Okay. I want to close out with a scene that is like super Bay Area. And I was a Bay Area lefty teenager, so for many decades, I've gone to different protests. So I wanted like a super Bay Area protest scene. I'm going to read, I think I'm going to start after the point where Food Not Bombs is feeding the people, but I just need to say, shout out to like fixtures of the Bay Area. Protest scene. Food Not Bombs is in here. Got a smiley face. So one of the things that you need to know is the Red, Black, and Green is in a fictional town. And the fictional town is called Holloway, and it's past Richmond on the BART, in the BART system, right? So as if there was a town past Richmond and that's where the BART ended. And I love fictional towns because you can kind of do what you want with them. And I also wanted a town that had a women's college. So it's very Millsish. It has a Millsish women's college, and the town is like very hood. And but it's a small town, unlike Oakland. It's like this small hood town, heavily Black and Latino and low income. And then there's this corporation, Randell, that is a biotech corporation that has this like weapons contract with the Department of Defense, which is why the FBI is in there spying, and there's all kinds of shady stuff going on. And yeah, why they, which is part of the reason that the FBI keeps sending infiltrators to keep these angry Black folks who are upset about the ways that this corporation is mistreating their community. Anyway, so this is the big protest that comes out of that previous scene where people were making all those speeches. So they're in Holloway at this big protest. At the far end of the park, several RBG teens had created RBG stands for Red, Black, and Green, not Ruth Bader Ginsburg. On the far end of the park, several RBG teens had created a makeshift stage by standing on a picnic table and were addressing the crowd through a bullhorn. Behind them, the concrete back of another building marked the unyielding perimeter of the park. As Yolanda moved through the rally, she caught a glimpse of Marcus and Sharon and worked her way toward them. At the same time, the teens on the bullhorn led the crowd in a more hip-hop version of an old protest chant. The people, what united, what will never be defeated. That's right, the people. They chanted for a while, and then a young Latina climbed onto the picnic table and led the chant in Spanish. El pueblo, what? Unido, what? Jamás será vencido. I said the people, what? The young woman handed the bullhorn to Darnell, who began to beatbox, vocalizing a rhythm to go with the chant, as she and another girl screamed the words from the picnic table. When the crowd heard the beat, they roared with approval. Two young men next to Yolanda began to dance in an undulating break rhythm that made their bodies look boneless and impervious to gravity. Yolanda pushed through the crowd to find Marcus and Sharon. Hey there, she said when she finally caught up to them. Great turnout. I've never seen this many white people. We need to talk, Marcus said. Sharon and I are calling a special meeting of the adults in RBG. Right now? Yolanda asked. Let's get away from this crowd for a minute, Sharon said, and ushered them toward the edge of the park under a large pine tree. I don't know how to say this, Marcus began. Yolanda turned and gave him her full attention. I know you don't have a lot of experience with political movements, Marcus said, but sometimes, particularly when a movement is effective, it can attract attention from the government or the opposition. Yolanda's mouth felt dry. RBG has been building our reputation for a while, but lately, with the Jenkins case and the article and everything. Oh, God, Marcus, Sharon interrupted. Look at her face. You're scaring the girl to death. Yolanda, the office is bugged. What? Yolanda said. We don't know who did it, Sharon said. We don't know what else is bugged. Whose house, whose phone, what. But we want to tell the adults today, and we'll have a meeting to figure out how to tell the young people. As the words tumbled out of Sharon's mouth, Yolanda's mind spun, dizzy with relief. Everyone knew. She could stop pretending to be comfortable. Another half confession poured out of her. It's so terrifying to think someone could be watching us, listening to everything we say, Yolanda said to Marcus and Sharon, not to have any privacy or not to know if you have any privacy or not. And her eyes welled up with the relief of it. She looked into their concerned faces, Marcus's furrowed brow, Sharon's open-eyed face nodding. All of us are really scared, Sharon said. All of us. Yolanda felt more connected to them than she had to anyone since she left Georgia. In the background, Yolanda could hear the crowd singing. People gonna rise like the water, gonna calm this crisis down. I hear the voice of my great-granddaughter saying, keep it in the ground. Yolanda, Marcus said, I'm really sorry that we got you into this. I know you're new to political work. Worst case scenario, you might have an FBI file now. It could jeopardize your future. I feel like I pressured you to take on a big role in the organization really fast. None of us expected this. I would understand if you left RBG. No way, Marcus, Yolanda said. I'm not leaving RBG just because we're effective. That's like leaving a winning team just because the opponents pull a prank in your locker room. Okay, Sharon said with an anxious smile, then we should find Jimmy so we can have this meeting. Yolanda scanned the crowd looking for him. On the picnic table, the teens were leading a new chant. Listen to the youth. We demand the truth. The crowd chanted along, waving their fists in the air. What do we want? Justice, the crowd yelled back. When do we want it? Now. The three adults from RBG found Jimmy in the crowd and moved toward him through the masses of people. Hey, Jimmy said. His smile expanded when he saw Yolanda. Some serious shit going down, bro, Marcus said. Sharon took his arm and pulled him to the side of the crowd. Jimmy reached for Yolanda's hand, and the four adults walked even further from the park. As Marcus told Jimmy about the bugs, Yolanda could see his jaw clench. We got to figure out what to tell the youth, who to tell. How do we tell them? They deserve to know, Sharon said, but I don't know if they can keep their mouths shut. I know Nikisha can't. But it doesn't seem right to tell some and not others. What the fuck, Marcus said. If we keep it from them and they find out later that we knew, I just don't know what integrity looks like here, Sharon said. But I'm most concerned about their safety. We don't even know what the hell to do to keep them safe, Marcus exploded. I've talked to their mamas. They're worried about their kids protesting. I've looked in their eyes and promised them it would be okay. This shit is not okay. As Marcus took several deep breaths and tried to calm down, they heard a booming voice over a loudspeaker coming from the Randell Corp side of the street. This is the Holloway Police Department. The cop in charge spoke through a much larger megaphone. You are participating in an unlawful assembly and you need to disperse immediately. I repeat, disperse immediately. A cordon of police began to march from the Randell lot in full riot gear. Yolanda froze for a second. What the hell was happening? The police had vehicles barricading the street on both ends of the block. The picketers were backing away from the cops, signs in hand. They moved across the street to the relative safety of the larger protest. Fuck the police! A young man's voice came over the RBG bullhorn, suddenly small and tinny compared to the police loudspeaker. The young black man, someone Yolanda didn't recognize, had grabbed the microphone from Nikisha. She was fighting to get it back, 2 handfuls of his jacket in her fists, face contorted with the effort of pulling against him with all her strength. Oh, shit! Marcus surged forward. Marcus! Sharon barked the order. You and me should go deal with the youth. Jimmy and Yolanda, go talk to the police. Jimmy and Yolanda crossed the street at a brisk walk. Yolanda put a hand on Jimmy's arm. I'll handle this, she said. I'm a lawyer. Jimmy nodded. Sir, Yolanda said to the officer in her most polite yet professional voice, my name is Yolanda Vance. I'm an attorney. This is my colleague, Jimmy Thompson, from the science faculty at Cartwright. What seems to be the trouble, sir? These people are just exercising their constitutional right to assembly. Ma'am, the cop said, they're blocking traffic. They're loitering. We caught some individuals littering, jaywalking on the street. The food people don't have a permit. The protest doesn't have a permit. It's a public park, officer. We received complaints from employees who said they can't get in or out because their way is blocked. You've broken up the picketing, sir, Yolanda said. No one is blocked anymore. Why can't you just allow these citizens to continue with this lawful assembly in a public park? Randell employees and other neighbors have complained that they feel intimidated by the protesters. The protesters aren't intimidating anybody, Jimmy said. Randell is the one killing people. Yolanda had never seen him angry before. She squeezed his arm gently. The cop looked squarely at both of them. Tell these people that if they don't want to end up in jail, they need to disperse immediately. My team is ready to move in and make mass arrests. Yolanda could see herself reflected in the cop's metallic shades, a distorted, convex version of herself, her eyes looking more imploring than she intended. She put on her most crisp, businesslike face. If you insist, officer, but can we have 10 minutes to get the crowd to disperse? You can have 1 minute. That's crazy, Yolanda snapped. You know we can't get 400 people out of that park in 1 minute. That's not my problem, ma'am. I have instructions to disperse the crowd immediately and start making arrests. There are news cameras here, reporters from the press. Jimmy heated up again. Would you like to be the first arrest? The officer asked. No, sir. He would not, Yolanda said. She was itching to pull out her FBI credentials and show them to this asshole. This is a peaceful and nonviolent protest, Marcus was yelling into the bullhorn microphone. We didn't come here today to make any trouble with the police. We came to demand justice for Anitra Jenkins. Yolanda sucked up her rage and spoke in clipped syllables. We're going to try to get the crowd to disperse. Please consider the impact on the reputation of your department if you use unreasonable tactics or excessive force, particularly with so much press in attendance." Yolanda and Jimmy turned away from the cops and hurried across the street. They looped around the perimeter of the crowd, trying to get to the picnic table where RBG was congregated. Over 100 camera phones were out, recording everything. "I'm not getting anyone to disperse," Jimmy said. "We have a right to protest here." "At this point, our right to protest is purely academic," Yolanda said to Jimmy and waved a hand in the direction of the police. "We better disperse before somebody gets hurt." "What the fuck, Yolanda?" Jimmy asked angrily. "What fucking planet are you from? These are the Holloway fucking police. Every black man in this crowd has been slammed against an HPD cruiser, including the one you're talking to. Right now, we fucking get hurt every day. Our fucking office is bugged. It's not like there's a safe path for us here. We need to stand up to these assholes." "Yes, but," Yolanda began when Jimmy grabbed her arm. "Watch out," he said, and pulled her out of the path of the advancing line of blue. The police crossed the street in a long row, then circled the crowd and moved in. Yolanda and Jimmy stood outside the circle, watching helplessly as the crowd constricted in on itself. "This is a peaceful and nonviolent protest," Marcus kept yelling into the microphone. The young man who had yelled, "Fuck the police," began shoving his way through the crowd. The ripples pushed out toward the edges of the crush of people, sending one young white woman stumbling toward the police, her phone out and recording. An officer took out his nightstick and clubbed her in the head. The phone fell out of her hand as she threw her arms up to protect herself, and the crowd surged back in panic, pushing back to the concrete wall at the far end of the park. "The whole world is watching!" Marcus screamed into the bullhorn as several teens stood beside him on the table, phones out. Meanwhile, the news cameras rolled at the edge of the circle, capturing the panicked faces in the mob, the police moving in. Yolanda watched horrified as she and Jimmy kept backing away. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Aya. Thank you.
My pleasure. That's the most I've gotten to read, so it's really enjoyable.
Yeah, I now feel like I'm mid-scene and I need to continue reading. So thank you for doing that trick. Good, it was great. So I have a couple of questions here. For those of you who have questions, please type away. But there are two that are really similar to each other, having to do with the comment you made at the very beginning that you began this book in your 20s. So I'm going to choose Jesse's because his question is longer, more. Let me see if I can unmute you. I cannot. Dave, can you unmute Jesse? All right, cool.
I think I'm unmuted now. Thank you, Aya. Really still kind of quivering a little bit from the last reading. But the question that I had was about the comment. And you had said that you began the book 20 years ago, or in your 20s, I'm sorry. My question was, what are the things that have changed? What are the things that have kind of stayed the same in terms of, technology, movements, themes, instances? And then also kind of a follow-up, why would you say these changes or non-changes occurred or remained? Thank you.
Sure, great question. Thank you so much. So the part of what inspired the book, one of the things that's interesting, right? For those of us who are no longer in our 20s, the things that we were writing about then, I started a lot of different books and some of them I just lost interest in, and I think I lost interest in them because the central thing that I was chewing on just wasn't something that had staying power in terms of keeping my interest. But what I was in a Black kind of radical community organization in my 20s, and we studied the history of the Panthers. And we studied COINTELPRO, and we looked at, the many dirty tricks that they used on the movements. And one of the things that they did was they would write a letter from one leader to another and, just, say terrible, insulting things. And one of the things that they counted on was that people didn't have good communication skills and relationship skills, and that, you know, you could say so and so something mean and sign someone's name to it, and they wouldn't go to them and say, hey, you know, that hurt my feelings, or what's up, you know, that people would just kind of withdraw and be resentful and angry, or, you know, retaliate in some way that wasn't kind of transparent. That people's communication lacked the kind of transparency that would get them to be like, wait, I never sent that. Well, if you didn't send it, who did, right? So, you know, you can't, the kinds of things that happened to Fred Hampton, you can't really control for, but you know, we talked about how one of our best defenses against that um, kind of stealth police violence was to have good relationships. And that if someone was sent to infiltrate our movement and we had strong relationships, that we would be able to resist that infiltration, in terms of our connections to each other. And something about that continued to be interesting to me decade after decade. And I think part of what I will say about it in terms of the movement for Black lives, the way that it lands is what happens when you have a movement of people who are unapologetically Black, and what happens when someone comes to infiltrate that movement who is apologetically Black, that something will be so attractive and appealing about a group of people who are working to be powerful and authentic, that even though the FBI's expectation is that she's going to take the movement down, that the movement has the capacity to take down her internalized racism that has her on the side of the FBI in the first place. So that continued to be interesting to me. And so then little things, you know, I could tweak and needed to tweak. So like one of the things that I wanted to change was that, you know, when I first started writing it in my 20s, I wasn't particularly concerned with the climate crisis, although Lord knows it was, you know, it was showing up in lots of different ways for the past several decades. The climate crisis wasn't on my radar in the same way. And I, at the time, would not have been able to articulate how connected racism and white supremacy are to the climate crisis. But now I'm very clear that the climate crisis requires sacrifice zones and sacrificial people, and racism becomes the way to identify who will be sacrificed. And then also just the technology, you know, like social media, early, you know, drafts of the book within the past decade still came from a world where there just wasn't even the internet and social media weren't playing the same kind of role. So I had to really work to get that part updated. And so those were some of the biggest changes.
Others? Are there any other questions? I had a question in regards to the length of time that the project took. How did you keep your stamina up?
Well, I mean, I wrote other books. I feel like that was the thing. You know, I still have a novel. So one of the things about my story is when I started writing, I was writing kind of on that genre literary line. Mm-hmm. And at that time, genre fiction was much more frowned upon. You know, in terms of literary circles, there was no sense that there was a connection between genre and literary. And so I had ambivalence about how I wanted to debut. Did I want to debut as someone writing something that was clearly a genre book, or did I want to debut as someone who was writing a novel that, you know, didn't have a clear genre label on it? So for many years, I worked on a different novel that wasn't in any particular genre, and couldn't sell it, but also was at the time very ignorant about the literary industry and just did everything wrong. Like, I was a spoken word artist at the time. Like, I sent the agent a package that included like a spoken word CD. It was just like, no, don't do it. But, you know, I couldn't quite sell that. So then I started working, I, you know, had the spy book in my mind. I was like, well, let me work on the spy book because it's a little more, you know, legible in terms of like what it is commercially. And then I was working on that, and an agent was kind of interested. And the day that the agent's assistant called me, I had just finished I just finished the first draft of like the sex worker heist novel. And she was like, oh, I really want to hear about that, you know? And so in some ways that was my most commercial book, right? The Justice Hustlers series. It was like heist, feminist, super sexy, women of color, politics. It, you know, I really wanted it to have all the bells and whistles. And that did end up being the first book that I sold. But you know, that's part of the hustle, right? You know, it's like, I'm writing this book. Okay, I can't sell this book. I'm going to write an even easier to sell book. I'm going to do it. I'm going to do it. And in all of it, you know, as a social justice writer, trying to figure out like, how do I keep the social justice politics like at a 10?
Mm-hmm.
What else do I have to really like bump up so that I can sell something that has like super lefty politics at a 10, but then what else does it need to be? And so, you know, with Uptown Thief, the first in the Justice Hustler series, I was like, I'm going to throw every genre I can. You know, I was like, I'm doing it all. It's like, it's a heist, and then it's got like the big thriller confrontation with the bad guy, and then it's a romance, and then I was like, yeah, and women's fiction, it needs some high-heeled shoes, and someone's got to go shopping, you know, like just literally threw in all the things. And you know, was like, let's see, you know, and I did manage to sell it. But yeah, I mean, I think that's been the thing, that there are all these different stories, but it's really all the same story. You know, for me, it's really these are all stories about women of color, and now with the YA, girls of color, right? Women and girls of color facing some of the biggest problems of our time: white supremacy, the climate crisis, you know, Hurricane Maria as a manifestation of the intersection between of colonization and the climate emergency, you know, violence against immigrants, and you know, the demand for assimilation, upward class mobility. Like, I'm just looking at, it's all the same stuff: racism, sexism, classism, colonization, and violence, you know, and homophobia and transphobia. Like, that's what I'm writing about. And so yeah, I feel like for me, and obviously I have that like compulsive that compulsive achievement personality, where I'm just like writing more, you know. And so like in the pandemic, it's insane, you know. It's like I had to make myself not write for the month of December, because it was like, writing is the place, right? Writing is the place where I get to decide, where I can take on these really heavy, hard political issues with these very flawed people who are trauma survivors. And I can decide. People can heal, people can figure out how to love each other, people can like fight, you know, the corporations and the bad guys and the sex traffickers, and they can win. And, you know, our world is not always with the underdogs winning. And so I love spending time there. And I write a lot of books.
Oh gosh, that's the only reason to write, period, right there, to make it how you like it. Okay, so we have a question here from Tanya, and if Tanya can be unmuted.
Hi, thank you for speaking. I just actually wanted to hear a little bit more about your approach about fictionalizing historical events. I mean, I guess kind of historical / current events, especially things that you feel passionately about, sort of how you funnel what you are including and what you're not.
I mean, I don't know if this is exactly your spin on it, but I'll say this. My process as a writer really looks like this. So first of all, like, I'm a mom and I have a job and I'm always doing too much and I'm an activist. So my thing is like, how do I get this moving and get it off my desk, and then, you know, work on it and get it back off my desk, right? So I'll do some research, a lot of times online research, you know, sometimes there's a book about X or Y, but mostly I'm working on the web. I'll do some research so that I feel like I have a grounding in the reality of it. And then I use my imagination and I imagine all kinds of stuff. So my fourth book, Side Chick Nation, was the first novel published about Hurricane Maria in Puerto Rico. I'm Puerto Rican, so it felt like I was like, it felt so heavy. right? To be trying to write about this disaster that has changed, you know, the fate and reality of my people and our island forever. And so I felt like I could, you know, there's some days I could barely breathe with feeling like, am I going to get this wrong? So I did a bunch of research and then I wrote it. And then, like, I am the queen of the sensitivity reader and the consultant. You know, I worked really hard to get a sensitivity reader who was a survivor of Hurricane Maria in Puerto Rico and was Puerto Rican, and had her read it, you know, and I didn't have her read the whole book, you know, but I was like, here are the excerpts that are, you know, relevant to, like, does this ring true? And she gave me a lot of good feedback. So I feel like that's my process, because if I felt like I had to research until I could imagine it properly, you can't ever get enough research. You can't ever research enough till you can imagine properly, but you can check your research based imagination. And so, you know, and for me, you know, I'm a multiracial person. I am Puerto Rican, African American, and West Indian, and I usually write characters with those who are like Latin, Caribbean, African American, or from the British West Indies. And, you know, and I still get sensitivity readers who are from a more specific slice than me, right? So, like, I'm Puerto Rican, I'm totally West Coast, second generation born in the US. So I had a New Yorican read my New York Boricua book. Like, how'd I do? She was like, you got it. I was like, great, okay. You know, a small chunk of money well spent. She liked the book. Everybody was happy. You know, the same thing. My West Indian character, you know, she was Trinidadian. My people are from St. Kitts. I've never visited, you know, so I've been to Trinidad. That doesn't mean I can write about it. So I had someone who's Trinidad, like, did I get it? You know, so I usually have like anywhere from like 4 to 8 people who will vet different parts of my books to make sure that I'm, you know, sticking the landing, because part of being a social justice writer is that I want to write in service to the different actual movements of liberation of the characters that I write about. And I will say, so, you know, with the sex worker, you know, there are people in my family and extended community who have been in the sex industries, but, you know, either not recently or not in the part that I was writing about. And so, I had a sex worker activist who like read my first book and she just like eviscerated my plot. She was like, these are all stereotypes and they've got to go. And I was like, I have no plot, you know? So I had to work really hard to clean it up. But of course, the new plot was better, you know? And so I really appreciated that. And some people I pay, some people are friends and I don't pay. Some people are activists who, you know, consider it their mission to, like, you know, give people feedback when they're creating public discourse about this stuff, you know, and I didn't pay her. I took her out to a few meals, you know, and she wouldn't accept any money, and I certainly would have paid her. But that's the, you know, for me, that's the process when you're writing about real people or real historical events. Like, you do your research, but you also check with people, you know, and I am someone who really weighed in on the American Dirt controversy as like a failure of that project, a failure of getting people to read it after the fact, to like see, was your imagination generative of a story that's liberatory to the people that you're writing about, or is there some bias or distortion of your lens that your imagination is looking through? And so, yeah, I get all my books vetted that way.
I can't, I'm so happy right now. I'm like, so this is a conversation we have been having in all of my workshops. All of my workshop people who are here tonight are like, Aya just did a real good job with talking about that thing we never got through real well. Thank you, thank you, thank you. It sort of sounds a little bit like it takes a village to write a book.
It does.
Yeah.
Definitely.
It does. It does. And the way that you describe your process, I think, is very close to every writer's heart. The not knowing and the wanting to know, and then being afraid of getting it wrong, and all of that stuff is super real. I have a million other questions, but it's 7:31 and I know we have to go to workshop. I will email you my questions that I have. And let's see, Dave wanted to close out with one thing. Aya, thank you so much.
Oh, thank you. This was super fun.
Awesome reading and the answers to the questions. And thanks everybody for coming to listen.
Thank you. Thanks. I echo everyone's joy of getting to hear you read tonight. I just wanted to say our next event is coming up. It's on March 8th. It's an evening, if you will. This is a Monday also, with Elisa Washuda and Teresa Warburton, the editors of a book called Shapes of Native Nonfiction, and one of the writers, Deborah Miranda, featured in that anthology. So we'll be talking about nonfiction, Native nonfiction, anthology building, the canon, all of that. So that's March 8th. Look for information about how to register, and please, with the new protocols, register early, arrive early, and everything will go smoothly. So thanks again, Aya, for everything you've given us tonight. We've got about a 15-minute break before workshops will be starting at 7:45. So have good classes, everybody.
Yay, thank you.
Have a good night.